Join us.
Let's walk the talk.
This is 702.
Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa on Thursday received the closeout report from the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. As I said, it's officially, well, not officially, but it's colloquially known as NACEC. The findings of which will soon be released publicly. And the presidency realized that this is a very important work that has been done. And it was held at the Union Buildings in Pretoria, where it was chaired by President Ramaphosa. Some of the critical things that came out of this are recommendations which include establishment of a permanent, independent, overarching anti-corruption body, and the strengthening and coordination of law enforcement agencies, and the use of artificial intelligence to prevent corruption, and the establishment of an anti-corruption data sharing framework. We thought we should just bring their work under the spotlight so that we understand a little bit better about them. There are various agencies in South Africa, and at times it's difficult to keep up. And we thought we should invite David Lewis, the deputy member. Well, he's a member of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. David Lewis, thanks for your time. Welcome to 702. Good morning to you.
Thanks, Thabo. Good morning to you too.
Again, please forgive my elementary opening question, because I always want to have us on the same page and not assume that everyone else knows where we are as far as your progress is concerned. Let's touch a little bit about the formation of NACEC 2 or 3 years ago. What is it meant to do, and where do we place it in the value chain of governance as far as trying to fight crime is concerned in South Africa?
Well, it has quite a wide mandate, quite a broad mandate, but the core parts of the mandate are to examine the country's institutional architecture in combating corruption, which largely consists of the law enforcement agencies, though others, and we're asked to recommend the establishment of a single. We're asked to examine the feasibility and the usefulness of establishing a single anti-corruption agency, and then also to recommend measures aimed at strengthening the law enforcement agencies. And then there are others about whistleblowing, communication, but the two core mandates, I think it's fair to say, are about institutional architecture and how to strengthen the law enforcement agencies.
One of the glaring findings that you have pointed out too is the fact that the country's ability to combat corruption is being undermined by a weak crime intelligence system. But you didn't go as far as asking for the disbandment of that particular agency. Say a little bit more about that, please, David.
Yeah, well, I think that the country has known about the rot inside crime intelligence since the days of the infamous Ndluli, who Jacob Zuma made head of crime intelligence in exchange for assistance, let's say, during his presidency of the ANC and of the country, and it has gone downhill even since then. It's an absolutely vital institution in providing intelligence to organizations that are fighting organized crime and organizations that are fighting corruption. And it is missing in action. In fact, it's not only missing in action, it's positively setting the country back by its interventions. And so we had to look at what to do about this. And we had to do this in a context where SAPS made it impossible for us to meet with them. They simply dodged meeting with us. But we met a lot of other people who had been involved in law enforcement, who were expert at law enforcement, and several of them did recommend the disbanding of the Crime Intelligence Agency, which has a budget of about twice the size of the Hawks, to give you some perspective on this. So we felt we couldn't go that far, not having met them So what we have recommended is something close to that, but that we think will be a better solution, and that is to allow the hawks who we have recommended be charged with investigating organized crime, and the independent investigating directorate in the NPA, which is charged with investigating and prosecuting serious corruption and serious commercial crime, that these two bodies be allowed to establish their own crime intelligence units.
Yeah.
And arguably there should be a third crime intelligence unit advising SAPs. So we have recommended the breakup, certainly, of crime intelligence, and we think this is a really urgent task. Fortunately, the Madlanga Commission is going to be investigating them as well. So there's a dovetailing between, if you like, the end of our work and the beginning of the Madlanga Commission's work, which I think is fortunate.
David Lewis, sticking a little bit with crime intelligence. In your findings, did you find in any way that there were some elements of interference from nefarious entities or individuals who are not supposed to have their fingers in not just the till of the crime intelligence, but the operations thereof? Were there any suspicions of political interference, to be direct with you?
There was certainly we heard nothing about political interference. You know, that wasn't, strictly speaking, our mandate. We were, unlike, say, the Zondo Commission, or indeed unlike the pending Madlanga Commission, we weren't investigating particular cases or particular matters. Ours was to provide policy advice about the structure of law enforcement agencies in the country, and about how to improve the law enforcement agencies.
How binding would your recommendations be? How far can they go? Or you just recommend and you look away, and it's up to the acting minister in this instance to take what you say, or just add a pinch of salt to the report?
Well, that's always an interesting question. I'd like to think none of us are going to sit back and wait for our recommendations to be accepted. I think we'll take a leaf out of Justice Zondo's books and continue demanding that our recommendations be accepted. That having been said, the recommendations received a very positive response from the president. And indeed, the day after we met the president, we met with a largish group of stakeholders, and they too, not without doubts here or questions here and there, but they too felt positive. And our former chairperson, Feroz Kachalia, is now the Minister of Police, so I guess that should help. And we've also engaged with the Ministry of Justice, and the minister there too has been supportive of our proposals.
Yeah, it's 17 minutes after 10. My guest is David Lewis, who is a member of Anti-Corruption Advisory Council, also known as NACEC. David, one of the things that you have put forward is establishment of Office of Public Integrity. We are already heavily laden with various entities, sub-entities of entities. How is this one going to be different, and what do you envisage OPI to be doing different to existing structures?
Yeah, I was waiting for that question, and it's a question worth asking. We found that a real gap in the anti-corruption architecture of the public sector is any body dealing with and focused exclusively on preventing corruption. We have plenty of bodies, and they're not doing that well, who are responsible for law enforcement agencies are responsible for investigating and prosecuting corruption, but we don't have many organizations responsible for preventing corruption. The SIU comes, the Special Investigating Unit comes as close as we get to that. So the OPI will be a body that focuses on preventing corruption. And there are a variety of ways of going about that, and they vary considerably. The one is, and this arguably may be the most important instrument, will be investigating systemic corruption, which is to say there are some institutions. Let's take everybody's favorite example at the moment, Tembisa Hospital. There are some institutions in which there is so much corruption. It's so much part of the daily life of the institution that you have to believe that there is something wrong with the managerial and governance systems of the institution that make it so vulnerable to corruption. There inevitably are also crooked people there who have to be weeded out. But if you just weed out the crooked people and put more people in, the system remains vulnerable to corruption. It will remain corrupted. And so that's what the OPI will do that no other agency in the country is exclusively focused on. And that is preventing corruption. And it will merge with the SIU, which is, as I say, a body that does some of this work already and does it well.
Apologies for that. Do you think that perhaps its independence will be somehow enforced by the fact that you would want it to be entrenched in a Chapter 9 of the Constitution, such as the Human Rights Commission and others? Placing it under Chapter 9 institution, does it give it a little bit more of a sting?
It gives it a little bit more protection. Everybody always cites the example of the Scorpions, which were, just disbanded at the whim of the executive. That couldn't happen with a Chapter 9 institution. But in addition to that, we've also recommended, you probably know that at the moment, the SIU can only act on a proclamation issued by the president. Recommended that requirement be done away with, that the president may, of course, order investigations by the new agency, but the new agency may also take up investigations on its own initiative, which also improves its independence. And we've recommended that it have the independence to set its own salary limits, its own salary structure within limits, and make its own decisions regarding employment. So we have focused significantly on that question of independence.
You pragmatically, looking at this suggested OPI, you wanted to have investigative functions, including risk mapping, systemic and audits, and civil investigations. Are we not duplicating tasks that ought to be in existence? And as opposed to having a new structure altogether, perhaps to revamp what is there and use the resources that are already there by getting rid of people who don't want to work and do their jobs, and bring in people who can and who are able to do their jobs?
Yeah, look, I mean, we have focused on the existing law enforcement agencies to a significant degree. But when we talk about the OPI doing investigation, it's not the investigation of criminality and the bringing to prosecution of a particular individual. We're talking about them investigating the systems that govern government agencies, public agencies, and looking at those systems and finding where the weaknesses are in the systems that allow for corruption of the scale found in certain of our organizations. And I should add that the reason why we focused on prevention is that I think the public don't sufficiently appreciate how difficult it is to investigate on a criminal standard of proof corruption, which is a secret conspiracy like cartels between two parties, and you've got to luck out and have a whistleblower somewhere in the scene. so it's very difficult to investigate and prosecute corruption. Not impossible, and we could do much better. But that means that it doesn't act as a very great deterrence, as the deterrence that there is to, murder, where you are much more certain of catching the perpetrator and successfully prosecuting him or her. So we're focusing on investigating systemic corruption,
Sure.
and that doesn't overlap with the law enforcement agencies' investigations. What will happen is that when you look at something like Tembisa Hospital, you'll find that indeed there are systemic problems, but you'll also inevitably come across the bad apples. And where the OPI does that, it must refer the evidence of criminality on the part of individuals or a network of individuals to the NPA and the IDAC, in the investigating directorate in the NPA. So we've been very careful about overlap. And we've been very careful about trying to get this thing set up as quickly and as inexpensively, as cost effectively as possible, which are two of the reasons why we've recommended that it be merged with the SIU, actually.
David Lewis is with NICAC, which is a National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. They have some very interesting recommendations that they've put forward for their president's consideration. It's 25 minutes after 10 o'clock. You are on 702. If you'd like to share a thought, a view, or a consideration at all, feel free to do so on 072 702 1702, or call us directly and ask him a question on 011 883 0702. David, the issue that you've raised and that South Africa has seen, and perhaps with much despair, is the matter of, or should I say, the phenomena of whistleblowers, where they do not necessarily enjoy much of support in South Africa. To their demise, they bring up information in the attempts to fighting corruption, but their fate is almost sealed, as they will be living as pariahs in their society, socially and economically. Do you have any thoughts around this, any tangible recommendations around the protection of whistleblowers?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, we have recommended that the responsibility for protecting whistleblowers be handed to the OPI, actually, and we've recommended support for them, psychosocial support, a degree of financial support, and confidentiality where that is necessary, and very often it indeed is. But the interesting point that you raise is that they will be regarded as pariahs. And we believe that, firstly, that whistleblowing and fighting corruption generally has to be championed at the very top of government by the president himself. And we believe that when the president honors whistleblowers, singles them out, not necessarily their names, but singles them out for their contribution to fighting corruption. And when there is a massive communications effort by the OPI to educate the public about what whistleblowers are doing, about what corruption is doing to us, and about how vital whistleblowing is in combating corruption, then we hope that notion that these people are impimpies or pariahs will disappear. And it's a tough one, that it really is a tough one. But we believe that, with a communications effort that goes beyond simply issuing media releases, but that is about telling the public, that is about using film, that is about using social media, that is about using billboards, that is about using, and it is indeed about using radio, but about using every communication mechanism available to us to educate the public. And in the course of our work, we saw some international agencies, and I had the good fortune to look at the Hong Kong agency, and there the communication has been extraordinary, and the outcome has been phenomenal. And people just have to see in Hong Kong a poster with the logo of their anti-corruption agency on it, and they know that they're being watched, and they know what their duties are. And that's what we want agency to achieve.
Yeah.
I don't doubt, with the help of people like yourself on radio, which is probably the most important communication mechanism, actually. But we want it to be a really creative, really intensive. I mean, I think of our efforts during the early days of the AIDS epidemic, and how much was done there. That's the kind of behavior change communication that we want to see.
Sure. I have just a few seconds, if you will. I just want to squeeze this in because after our chat, we will be crossing to Dr. Christy Cook. And this is about the Madlanga Commission. You've also had your 2 cents worth there, that Madlanga Commission's extensive powers. You want to add some powers there to including subpoenas. Say a little bit about that in the next few seconds before we say goodbye, David.
Yeah. I have to say, I thought that I think they do have subpoena power. So I don't know if we recommended that, it was superfluous, because they do. Listen, this Madlanga Commission should have been set up 15 years ago. This crisis in the police that we're going through now was a crisis waiting to happen. But now that it's there, we're fortunate that it can dovetail with our recommendations, because we've made baseline recommendations about the institutional character, but it will be for the Madlanga Commission to elaborate that, expand on that, and they will be principally focused on the SAPS.
Yeah.
And boy, do our SAPS need a kick up the backside, to put it quite mildly, because they really are a functioning organization.
We'll have to end it on that note. Always a pleasure talking to you, David Lewis, member of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. 10:30.